This is how I do it. I guess if you really wanted to, on this type of setup, you could just hit it in from the back side. But normally, I'll just use a nut and draw it on. It's a lot more controlled. And when you're dealing with cast iron, I mean, you should at least try to be nice to it. And that's it. There's one. And if you're curious how loose the wheel bearing is, it's pretty loose. I mean, everything here is pretty good. And this doesn't turn at all. I threw on that tie rod there, you know, earlier on the first video, and I expected it was gonna turn because it was so loose, but nada. And that's why that tie rod immediately failed. I'm gonna do the lug studs on the other side and see what else I can get into on this thing.
$2,500 off MSRP. You heard right. Holiday savings after T4 all new 2023 Ford F-150. Rehab inventory. Shop your way with the D-Flex buy. The stretch travel to Nelson the farm in Jackson, New Hampshire.
Well.
Yes, this week is the ultimate holiday adventure.
Yeah, you are miserable. Going done where? Oh yeah. Peachy. I'm very surprised that this engine has absolutely no coolant in it. I tried draining it from the lowest point and nothing come out. I thought for sure, being that this water pump was bad, that would have leaked out the seal and, you know, there still would have been coolant in the lower half of the engine. It also doesn't rotate. Thing's be shut. Just because it's easy to get to, should be able to just get a pair of pliers on, turn this knurled nut off. that's the cable. I think this cable's broke right here. It's part of the cable. I thought it was a spring at first. I think that needs to get pulled out. I do find it weird that this whole thing turns, but it looks like I can just tighten it back to that location there and it should be just fine. Well, that ain't cool.
Check out all the CDL inventory. Tubing, mainline, fittings, vacuum pumps, wood splitter, and processor available to rent, and much more. Smile Supply Company and CDL Maple Sugaring Supplies on Boynton Street, your local sugar house resource. Smile Supply Company, family owned and building relationships since 19.
Oh no. Alright, let's see if I can take the whole thing off there. Alright, so it should just be a worm gear. It turns and feels good, so that's promising. Let me clean this thing up so I can get a better look at it. I see in the comments people talking about power washing tractor or equipment before I work on it. I live in Vermont, and in December it's extremely cold, and if you power wash something, it's just going to turn into a block of ice. A lot of times you can't even wash it because the water turns to ice before it can even drip off of something. I like to use compressed air. Keeps things dry at least. The only crappy part about that is it's a little bit uncontrollable where the dirt goes. You can see a piece rotating. Normally I think it's the cable's pressed to a square shape, and I don't know, must be the cable got stuck in the sleeve or something and something had to give, which the cable itself was the thing to give. Ended up getting twisted and breaking off. That's why the tack no longer functions. So I'm going to blast this off with a little bit of compressed air, and I guess I'm just going to keep yanking on this thing. I'd rather not take it apart. It doesn't look like it'd be much of a treat at all to take that thing apart. Probably would have to buy that, but I'm too cheap. I'm hoping I can get these vice grips on here as tight as I can and wedge that screwdriver in between to pull it out of it. Initially I was hoping this cap would come off and maybe that is bored straight through and I would be able to tap it, but it should just slide right on out, easy peasy. But not everything works the way it should. That's alright. There you go. That's it. Get out of here. Yeah, sure enough, it's a square shape. I'm assuming this cable is original. I don't know what the life expectancy is on these things, but all it takes is getting chafed in one spot, getting water in it, and go ahead and throw it back in that thing. Fit very well. Well, I pretty well got the whole surface where the gasket meets here all scraped. Basically, my main objective was any spots where there's any gasket material, I have it gone. It's a very straight edge here, so I just know that when the new gasket goes on here with the water pump, it's going to lay nice and flat. And things that are flat seal good. When you leave anything on here, it doesn't matter how much you tighten those bolts, it's going to leak. You just can't compress, you can only compress so much. And those paper gaskets are only so forgiving. Oh, that's nice. I'm still going to flush water through this thing. I'm not calling the compressed air good enough. I'm not able to run a garden hose in where I'm at, and I don't really care for swimming. I'm probably just going to get it all back together, fill it up with some water, run it, let it circulate if it's going to circulate. I mean, I'm assuming it's gonna, but I don't know the condition of the thermostat or anything like that, judging by the rest of this here. But anyways, just going to see what it's going to do, where it's going to leak, drain it out. I am sure I'm going to have to put fluid in this thing at least a couple times. There's going to be leaks somewhere. So again, we'll get it tight enough. They're only 5/16 bolts. For all I know, there's just like a massive hole on the bottom hose. So right here I have a hole that's clean, clear, right through the tank of the radiator. So that's immediately going to leak coolant. It's from the hood or some type of mount to the hood, resting on it and vibrating as the engine's running, and it wore through. So I'm going to use some solder. And the trick to it is getting it as clean as you can. Sometimes a wire wheel is not enough, but we'll see. That definitely looks clean enough. I'm no expert with solder. I know you can get it with the flux in it and whatnot, and that's probably, well, maybe the stuff I have. I don't think so though. But we're just going to smooch a little bit on there just to know for sure we got plenty. Ideally, we're going to heat up the metal of the tank, and that's going to melt the solder. Same way as soldering a pipe. It's just the thing is I don't want to get this so hot to where I get this old solder liquefied again or compromise its joining. So we're just going to run with it. Normally a lot of heat, or kind of medium heat I guess, but more heat. It's going to focus it right here immediately instead of soaking into the part. Usually kind of hard to tell when it's ready, but you start touching that and then it starts looking like this. Just keep bringing the heat back as you need it. want to make it too hot to where that hole just keeps appearing. But I don't want it too cold to where it doesn't bond. Right there, I just about got it. I want just a little bit of extra material on there. I'm going to run around the edge a little bit. I'm pretty confident with that right there. It was just on the very corner there. The bracket here is soldered on. That's what is holding the radiator itself. I'm going to use a paint strainer just because I'm using used coolant, and the reason for that is because it's wintertime. It's going to get too cold to just use water. I am sure I am going to have to drain it all back out and repair some hose or whatever, but I got to figure out where it's leaking first, if it's going to leak. I don't know. It needs to get flushed too. Oh, nice. The lid of my bucket leaks like hell. Oh. Well, for Pete's sake. People are gonna probably comment about how cheap I am. Yeah, I'm cheap alright. I'm a Vermont farmer. Alright, I hear a lot of water on the floor. Oh. Yeah. I'd say that radiator is probably shot. I don't think there's going to be any fixing this thing. I had a feeling it was going to leak down here, but that is horrible. It's almost out of the same elevation on the rows. And I think just junk. I knew it. You know, I should have just took this thing out. If I took it out, it would have been so much easier doing that water pump. But you don't know until you get there. You know, it's easy to just watch a video and comment and be like, oh, you should have done this. Yeah. I would have done that if I knew. And that's why we use used coolant. So instead of putting that on the floor and returning it back to the earth, I'll catch it. But yeah, that's that. It doesn't hold coolant. So I took apart the hours gauge tack combo right here. The reason why I did that is because the cable for it that mounts in the back of it there, I wasn't able to turn the mechanism inside here. I was using a piece of the old cable and just using my fingers to try to turn it. It wasn't turning, so I was assuming there was something wrong on the inside of that thing. Realistically, all I needed to do was try it with a pair of pliers. I didn't want to break anything, but it just happened to be right where the bushing was as soon as the cable enters the back of the gauge. But also inside here, there was a stripped out plastic gear. Has to do with the hours gauge part of it. That doesn't work because it's stripped, but the tack does. So we're going to go ahead and fire it up and see the tack work. I've only tried it using my fingers, but I am very confident it's going to work. Just not the hours gauge. Well, I'm very disappointed that I broke that glass to that thing because the tack works. You know, I would have been plenty happy with that. But this thing, it's not, well, it is meant to be taken apart, I suppose, but having the right tools and whatnot, and putting it together with a pair of pliers, I just barely touched the edge of that glass and broke it. But it does work, and there is some goop on there, and maybe it'll be fine for now. I doubt it. I'll probably have to buy one of those gauges if I really want that, and I would like it. But oh well. Aside of that fact, I mean, belt stayed on there, I guess, you know. But I can't really fully see, you know, if the water pump's gonna hold and whatnot, fluid, but I don't know. I guess I gotta dig that radiator out of there. I don't really need it in there. It's either that or just go ahead and order a new one, and when I have the new one I can just drop it in so I don't have to guess what bolts go where. I don't know. That sucks. That sucks. That thing has to be so shot. It is concerning in the fact that, is it corrosion? Did, you know, the whole lower half of that radiator just corrode like hell and get a bunch of pinholes? Very high possibility. There is a lot of junk down there. I mean, is it because someone left water in this and maybe it wasn't full and that lower portion of the radiator got split from water? But if it's like that, then there's water in the engine too at the same time. And this is the lowest port of the engine to the radiator. And I had this hose off over here. I had that off to see what was in it to drain out, and this thing was ungodly bone dry. So I don't know, it'd be very crappy if something there is cracked and all the coolant is going into the oil pan. I mean, I don't know, because I can't fill that up enough to fill this up. But potentially I'm going to do all this work for nothing. You know, sometimes that's just how these things go. But that's alright. Not that I put much coolant in it, but the oil still looks just fine. I wasn't really expecting to change the radiator, but that's minor. It's just these front end parts. A lot of it's just shot. I mean, this race here sits in loosely, which is not good. I'm not even sure about that one. I got some other crap in there. Just, it's been a lot of stuff. Now, I know it looks a little weird. I got a trailer axle kind of mocked up underneath there. It's just temporary. I kind of got some more bad news. So, you have an inspection cover for the clutch, and I took off the 2 bolts that are right here to remove the cover, and this is what I found. So there's all these springs here. A bunch of these are broken. I'm not even sure how many springs are supposed to be in there. This goes on the friction disc, and I don't know, there must be 6, I suppose. They all go kind of in line with the direction of rotation. I don't know if this makes up one more spring or if these are broken. I haven't even pulled these things off here yet. Not really sure what caused this, but I'm assuming this is why the tractor has been parked. I just noticed some bolts that have been taken out of it for the side cover for where the clutch adjustment is at. They got additional washers on it right here. And then also the clutch return spring is missing. And that goes from that loop right to that notch. And that's not been on it the whole time I've had it. I mean, not that I've run it much, but near the end of when the tractor is being used. So, I mean, the big problem when your spring is missing is that riding your throwout bearing constantly, because the weight of this is engaging your throwout bearing to your pressure plate. So, I don't know. To put it in a nutshell, not good. Alright, this is the bottom of the tractor where the inspection cover is. Now, I wish this camera zoomed, but it doesn't. So I'll just try to Get it in a good spot. I guess right there you can tell right in the center of the frame, those spots that have all shiny metal, that's where the springs sit. You can see 2, I don't know, maybe 3 spots. All the springs are gone. The other thing that looks weird too is that cotter pin has been rotating, and that must be from vibration or something. Obviously I've yet to take it apart to fully look at what's going on, but I do know that the friction disc is toast. So I'm gonna have to split this tractor. It's not too big of a deal. That is right here. There's a seam. There are bolts holding the 2 halves together. And that's where I need to split it because the clutch is inside here. So the wire harness is going to have to get marked and unhooked from the engine side, laid over on this side. And you'll notice there's a lot of connections that are near this point for a specific reason. Now, I don't just mean that on that specific fitting, but if I go on this other side, we got all these steel hydraulic lines, 2 for steer, the other one for the cooler, and they got all these joints conveniently right here, right near where I need to split it. So I can split all these lines without chasing them one way or the other. Try to keep this simple. I know some people, they get all charged up and they see all these short rubber lines and they're easy to replace, but they just start getting them out of the picture. But if you're putting it back together, if you leave them there, it can kind of tell you where it needs to be routed. Now, it's unfortunate when you put something together and it don't work right the first time, and then you're having to guess what you did wrong. Now, this is where this project's going. It was parked for a reason. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I didn't show taking off the radiator from this tractor. Very straightforward, taking it out of there. But I will show putting it back in. I will do that at least. I took the whole front end apart, the spindles, the bearings, all that, trying to evaluate what I need to do there. Unfortunately, I mean, it's fortunate that I can buy these parts, but my golly, they're starting to add up. It totally makes sense why someone parked this thing and said, you know, we're done with it. Will I have a lot of money wrapped up in this thing? Absolutely. But am I better off doing it this way than buying one? Definitely, because I know what I got, and it's going to be a bunch of new parts and whatnot. If I go out and buy a tractor, it'll have all these same issues, and then I'm having to buy those parts again. So I'd rather just fix it all, know it's right, you know, and then it'll be fine for a while until whatever else wants to mess up on it, but that's all right. So the plan is to split the tractor, obviously, and that comes back to the trailer axle. And because I've taken apart the entire front end, sure, I could put everything back in here and back together so that I can roll it, just run it straight up through. I'm gonna have the tractor at the exact height I want it, which I would like it level, and I'll probably weld some type of straight ledger to the side of the pipe so that this can't continue to slide down the pipe. It'll slide down and it'll be at the specific height that I'm looking for. You want it to come apart straight. It's not, I guess, as critical coming apart straight, but I don't want to break anything, and also when it goes back together, it is extremely critical for it to be straight so that you're engaging with those splines squarely and it's going into your pilot bearing. You don't want to be misaligned. It's better to take the time to make a good setup to where when you're bringing these things together, you can do it squarely. You don't have to have the fancy pants tools. I'm not going to do it with the fancy pants tools. I'm just going to kind of make something up, and that's kind of my misfortune, is that I've already taken it apart. Because if I left it together, I wouldn't have to do what I'm doing now. You know, I once said these bolts would be a lot easier to get to if the radiator wasn't there. Well, so I have my upright, goes right up through, and over here, use a little piece of threaded rod that's between those two parts welded together, it's physically too large to slide up through. So that is basically a ledger that this thing is sitting on. The other side's the same way. I was just using scrap that I had, and that's going to be fine. Alright, so the jack has no weight on it. It's just sitting there in case something weird happens. It's seems to be holding the weight right now. I don't know. Seems just fine to me. So here's the setup. Right now I have the jack underneath the back half. That's holding up the majority of the weight. There's a little bit of weight on the trailer axle. And that just barely clears the engine hoist. I didn't even take that into consideration, but it just happened to work out. And if anything, they're both on wheels, so it's not really that big of a deal at all. This was where the inspection cover was. That was the lowest point, and with all the vibration and everything, that's why all those springs ended up there. There's a few more hanging out in here. Now, this is definitely why the tractor was parked. Everything seems to look pretty good. So, I mean, not that I'm going to leave this stuff, but it's at least nice to see it's not completely trashed. The splines right here are pretty worn. This should be for the PTO. So here's the other end. And to just kind of go over what I was just barely talking about, these two different splines here. This spline right here, which is on your pressure plate, that never stops turning. So that's for the PTO. The other one is for the transmission itself. And that's on the friction disc. And that's the one that's missing the springs. So all those little spots where it's all blown out, that's where those springs go. Every single one is missing. It's good to take your time and just slowly evaluate things. Just because as it's dirty, you can see the way things have been moving on each other. Any spots that are shiny, it means something's moving. I mean, clearly this cotter pin and pin have been rotating for whatever reason. Should be just friction. I mean, not friction, vibration. So I got the pressure plate off. I may have or may have not dropped it, but that's fine. Just checking out this surface. Looks actually excellent. The friction material itself looks pretty good too. I mean, there's a lot on there. But anyways, these springs go here. That's all worn out thin, so I don't know, must be they were vibrating in place and centrifugal force is driving the springs outwards, and that's why the outward side of this thing is all worn super thin. This one probably fell out because all the other ones were gone, and then this whole thing was focusing on the one spring. I was expecting a lot worse. I guess that's all I'm trying to get at. The pilot bearing really doesn't feel too bad. I'll get a clutch ordered for this thing, and we'll stab that back in there, and then we can get it back together. Another place to look for wear is right here. This is where your throw-out bearing contacts. This tractor was missing the clutch spring, so what that was doing was the throw-out bearing was touching this thing all the time. I really dislike walking away from a project and coming back to it weeks later and trying to figure out where you left off. So anyways, pretty obvious, I left off with the clutch. It's just the little things though. Typically your clutch will say flywheel side. They should have it printed somewhere or a marking, but if you're observant enough of how your original one come out, you can just put it in the same way, assuming it was correct to begin with. I don't want to go over every single little thing about doing a clutch job. I'm just going to kind of wheel this thing out, I guess. So I'm going to stab the clutch into this thing. It's a good idea to make sure you have the correct side going towards the flywheel. I'm not going to go over every single detail about installing a clutch, but I'm going to change the pilot bearing. I'm also going to change the throwout bearing. I probably won't really videotape that because it's a very A to B thing. Another thing to keep an eye on is, depending on your machine, 9 times out of 10 you're going to have dowel pins. This is a dowel pin. What that does is precisely locate the bell housing to the engine. And sure, you can take those things out and use the bolts to locate it, but it's not very accurate. The whole purpose of having that there is having your transmission shaft precisely aligned with your crankshaft. So it's just something to keep your eye out for. Sometimes they fall on the ground when you take something apart. Or if you're using a different engine and putting it to a transmission, this one hung on to the transmission side, and per se you had one hang on this side. Well, you don't want them going end to end. You only need one on, whichever spot. Typically there's 2. Seems like this machine, yeah, this machine does have 2.